My name is Rhonda Hungerford. I lived in Baldwinsville for over 30 years. And Professor Keck has very kindly offered his time to do this presentation on trying to make sense of the Mueller report. Personally, my experience has been with the League of Women Voters for 30 years, and we were trying to register voters and trying to get information out to voters, not with a lot of success a lot of times. And so I joined Indivisible 13224, which was a wonderful experience, and some of you are here today, a wonderful group. And then also, absolutely, and Indivisible New York 24, which Tom was one of the founders of Indivisible New York 24. And it's been a fantastic experience. You know, when the presidential campaign started in 2016, it was obvious that things were changing. And it was very upsetting to many of us, and I found that getting involved and doing something about it was very rewarding, and I'm so glad I did. It's helped the last 3 years go by a little bit easier. So we're hoping that that some of you live in the northern suburbs. How many people live in the northern suburbs? Okay, great. So if you have a few minutes at the end, just a few minutes, we'd like to talk with you about the possibility of starting an individual group up here in the northern suburbs. And so we're going to go ahead and start with Professor Keck, who is a political science professor at SU's Maxwell School. And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Rhonda. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks so much to Rhonda for that, and thanks also to Christine Wood, who helped organize this event. Thanks to Ron back here, who I just met 10 minutes ago, but he's live streaming the event for us because a couple folks told me they couldn't make it and they wanted to see the video. Jessica Bumpus helped us out with some stuff here. Hi, Jessica. A lot of people put some work into making this event happen. Thanks to the library for hosting us, and thanks to you all for coming out. I don't have a mic here, so I'm just going to project and raise your hand in the back if you're not hearing what I'm saying. Raise your hand also if I start talking too fast, which I have a little bit of a tendency to do, so please just let me know. And so, as Rhonda said, I'm Tom Keck. I teach at SU's Maxwell School. I'm always supposed to say I'm speaking on my own behalf. I'm not speaking on behalf of Syracuse University. I guess I should also say, because Rhonda sort of alluded to this a little bit, so I guess I'm here kind of with two different hats on, right? So I've got my activist citizen hat on, right? I'm a member of Indivisible, which is the grassroots organization that is hosting this event, which is an anti-Trump resistance organization. But I'm also a political scientist at SU, and I feel like today mostly I'm wearing my political scientist hat, right? By which I mean for the past 25 years or so, I've been reading and writing and teaching about the U.S. Constitution, and so I'm here to give you my best scholarly assessment of the contents and significance of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report, right? So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to talk for a little bit. I'm going to show you some slides with some quotes from the report and whatnot, and then I'll take as many questions as we have time for. There's a great number of people here. I'm sure people have lots of stuff you're going to ask about, so that would be great. We'll take as many questions as we have time for, and then as Rhonda said, we're going to save a few minutes at the end for folks who are from up here in the northern suburbs, to have a little conversation with Rhonda and Christine and others about getting an indivisible group started up here. So that's the plan. Thank you, and I will jump right in. So let's start with this guy. So this is Attorney General William Barr, and so if you jump back in time a couple months, right? So go back to late March, before any of us had seen the Mueller report. And let me actually ask this: raise your hand in the room if you have read any or all of the Mueller report yourself. Okay, awesome. Raise your hand if you have not read any or all of the Mueller report. Okay, that's what I'm here for. So it's really long. It's like 400 pages, and it's pretty dense. So before any of us had seen it, right? Before any of us had seen it, Attorney General Barr came out with a 4-page summary, right? And he said the report has been filed. Here's my summary of its key findings. He also made a couple public appearances where he gave some verbal accounts of the report. And in his written summary and in his verbal summaries, he made 3 main points. First, he said that the report found no evidence of collusion, by which he meant that Special Counsel Mueller had not found evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government in its effort to influence the 2016 election. Second thing he said was that Special Counsel Mueller had drawn no conclusion on whether President Trump had engaged in illegal obstruction of justice. Right? Once the investigation was underway, it's illegal to obstruct a federal investigation. Did he illegally obstruct justice? Special Counsel Mueller drew no conclusions on that, but I, Attorney General Barr, have concluded that President Trump did not do so. That's what he said. And the third thing he said was that we need to sit on the report for a matter of several weeks before I can publicly release any of it, so that we can properly redact it, which is the lawyer's term for using a black marker. Is how they used to do it. Now they do it online on the PDF, right? But for blacking out the portions of the report that are not legally allowed to be released to Congress or to the public, right? So we need to properly redact it. So it's going to be, I'm going to release as much of the report as I can, but that's going to take a while. So for now, all you've got is my 4-page summary, right? That's what Attorney General Barr told us back in late March. For a period of weeks, or a period of almost a month, the mainstream media pretty much took those 3 points at face value. The Attorney General says these things, they must be true. In hindsight, now, a couple months on down the road, we know that all 3 of them are false. Or, if I'm going to try to be a little bit more charitable, all three of the things that Attorney General Barr told us were significantly misleading, is the most charitable way I can put it. Right? Now, why is this important? It's important because if I tell you not to think of an elephant, you can't do it. So if I tell you to unlearn the 3 things that Attorney General Barr told the entire country about the contents of this report, it is really hard to do. We didn't have the report. We didn't have anything else to look at. The only information we had were the 3 things that he told us about it. And I'm going to tell you something different about the report, but it takes like some extra effort now to unlearn, to get people to think about what's in the report differently than the first thing that they heard about it. The first thing that the entire country heard about it was those 3 things that I just told you, right? So what I want to do today is go through what I think are some of the key takeaways from the report. And the account that I'm going to give you is pretty different from Attorney General Barr's account, right? And I hope by the end of the hour, however long we have, I hope I've helped unlearn some of the things that the Attorney General told you. So let's take this one first, right? So he said there's no evidence of collusion in the report. So again, this is about Russian efforts to influence the outcome of our 2016 election and whether or not the Trump campaign coordinated with those Russian efforts. So that's what Barr said. Here's what the report says. The Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Unambiguous conclusion in the report. The entire first half of the report is devoted to this. There's 2 main sections of the report. Volume 1 is devoted to Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. There's 2 main ways in which Russia did this. The first way, oh, you can't see the red at all on the screen. All right, that's too bad. Well, I'll tell you what it says. The red's supposed to make it stand out, to make it easier to see. So if we make it dark, we could, but then people might fall asleep. If it's possible to turn the lights out in the front, but not the whole room.
Better. A little better. Yes.
So,
off and then on. Is that okay? Sorry.
So a Russian entity affiliated with the Russian government carried out an active social media campaign with the explicit purpose of aiding presidential candidate Donald Trump, that's what this says here, it's a quote, and disparaging presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. And there's tons of detail in the report about this, right? So Russian operatives were trained to work on basically every existing social media platform, right? So they had different agents assigned to different platforms. There were folks who worked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube, and they frequently posed as Americans, right? Often using the names and identities of real American persons whose names and identities they were using without authorization. right? They also frequently posed as being affiliated with one or more real existing political organizations in the United States, right? So sometimes political organizations on the right, like Tea Party organizations, sometimes political organizations on the left, like Black Lives Matter groups, right? And the idea was that they would pose as members of a Black Lives Matter group in Buffalo, say, this is a real example, and they would post inflammatory content that was intentionally designed to exacerbate existing divisions amongst the American people, right? So posting inflammatory content that their expectation was would make potential Trump voters mad and would make them more likely to turn out and support Donald Trump, right? Systematic effort on social media to inflame already existing tensions amongst the American people in ways that would help President Trump's campaign. Most of this effort was online, right? It's focused on social media, but on several occasions it did lead to real-world actual things happening in the United States, right? So, for example, political rallies and events would be organized by Russian operatives on Facebook, and then real people would show up at those events, unbeknownst to them that it was Russians who had organized the event in the first place, right? So it's mostly an online presence, but it led to some real on-the-ground political activity as well. And again, this is all documented at length in the report. The second component of the Russian effort on this front to interfere with the 2016 election, again, systematic and sweeping in systematic fashion. The second component of this, which again unfortunately is in red here, is that a Russian intelligence service conducted computer intrusion operations directed at the Clinton campaign, right? So they systematically hacked into first the email accounts of both volunteers and employees at the Clinton campaign, including Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, right? They stole their emails. They also hacked into the servers at the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They also hacked into the servers at several state boards of elections, and they also hacked into the servers at several private election vendors who build voting machines, right? And they stole thousands of documents, right? This is illegal to hack into somebody's private computer network and steal their personal business, right? They stole thousands of documents, and then they distributed those documents via third parties, most notably WikiLeaks, right? So WikiLeaks is a pre-existing organization that tries to expose what it sees as government corruption, but the Russian government was working with them. They gave them thousands of private emails from John Podesta's account, and WikiLeaks distributed them. Perhaps the most notable episode of this was on October 7th, 2016, so about a month before the election, when WikiLeaks began began publishing online Podesta's emails 1 hour after Trump's Access Hollywood tape was released to the media, right? So they had it all ready to go, and they waited for the political moment at which Trump's campaign was most threatened, right? And then they started publishing Podesta's private and embarrassing emails in an effort to change the public conversation from a negative focus on Donald Trump to a negative focus on Hillary Clinton, right? Systematic and sweeping effort to influence our election. The report also finds, so again in red here, this says the investigation also identified numerous links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, right? So there's numerous documented links, right? Trump himself publicly endorsed the computer hacking. Remember, if you're listening, I hope you can find Hillary Clinton's missing emails. Trump and his campaign officials privately had advanced knowledge of the existence of these efforts. The most famous instance here, right, is the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, where, I think I got an image about this, right? So this is a page from the report. June 9, 2016, senior representatives of the Trump campaign met with a Russian attorney expecting to receive derogatory information about Hillary Clinton, right? Robert Goldstone, who is the Russian emissary, had emailed Donald Trump Jr. promising to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia. Donald Trump Jr. replied immediately, "If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer," is the rest of that quote. And then they continued the conversation by email and they set up that meeting to work it out, right? So direct evidence of coordination between Trump campaign officials and family members, right? In addition to Donald Jr., Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort were at that meeting in Trump Tower, and it seems pretty clear that Donald Trump himself knew about it. So systematic Russian efforts to influence our election, and a fair amount of evidence linking the Trump campaign to those efforts. Nonetheless, the report does not recommend indictment of any Trump campaign officials for conspiracy to undermine our election. And so it's worth thinking a little bit about why that is. Remember, Attorney General Barr's first bullet point was no evidence of collusion. That phrase is misleading in two different ways. First of all, collusion is not a thing, right? The report says this explicitly. We did not investigate anything called collusion because there is no federal crime that uses the word collusion. Some political figures have used that word in public discussion. That is not something we investigated because it does not exist in the federal criminal code. What we investigated was conspiracy, whether any American campaign officials engaged in a criminal conspiracy with the Russian government to influence our election. The second reason that phrase is misleading, no evidence of collusion, is the no evidence part, right? There's tons of evidence, right? What the report concluded in Volume 1 is that we do not have sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that any single Trump campaign official committed criminal conspiracy with the Russian government, right? That's what you need to bring a federal criminal prosecution. We don't have that, so we're not recommending any federal criminal prosecutions here. But meanwhile, here's lots of evidence, right? It's not, the bar is not like, do you have zero evidence? No, they don't have zero evidence. They have lots of evidence, just not enough to support a criminal conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. So, I'm maybe verging on beating a dead horse here, but let me just say one more thing about this point, because I really think the Attorney General was quite misleading on this point. Here, again, half of this is in red, sorry about that. Here is a quotation from Attorney General Barr's 4-page summary that he released back in March. The part that is in red is a quotation from the Mueller report. So this whole thing is from Barr's summary, and he is quoting from the report. And I want to call your attention to one little piece of this here. So lawyers are sticklers about quotations, right? If you're going to put something in quotation marks, and you are a lawyer, including the Attorney General of the United States, even if you're trying to mislead people, you're going to be a stickler about it, right? They are such sticklers that, I don't know if you can see this, but this says bracket, capital T, close bracket, H-E. It's the word the with a capital T, but the T is in brackets, right? Lawyers do that because they have changed a lowercase t to a capital T. And to a normal person, that might seem fairly trivial, but to a lawyer, that might be significant. And so to show that we changed that, in order to make the grammar of our sentence look better, right, the punctuation and grammar in our sentence, we put that part in brackets. So when this first came out in late March, everybody, not everybody, like lawyers, legal analysts, right, so where I first saw it noted was from CNN's legal affairs correspondent. She's like, what? Look at the brackets. He's clearly quoting half of a sentence here, right, because that was a lowercase t. How much you want to bet, this is CNN's legal analyst back in March, how much you want to bet that that sentence starts with the word although, right? Because here's what it says. As the report states, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Here's the actual full quote from Robert Mueller's report. Although the investigation established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, and that the campaign expected it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through Russian efforts. All of that we have established. However, it is still true that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. We established that Russia interfered with the election. We established that the Trump campaign knew about it in advance. We established that they expected to benefit from it. We just did not establish beyond a reasonable doubt that they actively coordinated with that effort. which is what you would have to prove in a federal criminal court to sustain a conviction for conspiracy. That's Barr's statement, where he quotes half the sentence. This is the actual statement from the Mueller report, which is not accurately summarized by the phrase, no evidence of collusion, right? That is simply not a fair characterization of the first 150 pages of this report. A related point that's worth noting is that it's clear that we don't yet have all of the relevant evidence on this front, right? Let me show you this image. So this is a tiny image of every page in the report where you can see the redactions, right? You can see the parts that are blacked out. You can just see what it looks like. And so you can see, they did in fact release the vast majority of the report to the public, right? 93% of the report has been made publicly available. Only 7% has been redacted. But as you can also see, the redactions are not evenly distributed throughout the report. There's a section up here where there's 9 consecutive pages that are almost entirely blacked out. That is in the section on Russia's active measures social media campaign, right? 9 consecutive pages where the special counsel's investigators know a bunch of things that we still don't know, right? So there's a lot of facts relevant to this that we still don't know. This table shows you, right, almost half of the Russian active measures social media campaign section has been redacted. We just don't know what it says. And almost a quarter of the section on Russia's hacking operations, that's the stolen emails, has also been redacted. We don't know what those pages say either, right? So there's a lot of evidence that there's good legal reasons for keeping some of that, potentially good legal reasons for keeping some of that material from us. But I'm just saying we don't know there's still more stuff to be learned, right, from this section of the report. And what we already know is pretty damning. The report also says, so this is about things that Special Counsel Mueller and his team learned that we still don't know about, right? That they learned and they put it in their report, but it just hasn't been released to the public, right? But the report also says that there may be things that we did not get to the bottom of, right? There may be material facts that were successfully concealed from our investigation because the entire second half of the report, volume 2, is about obstruction of justice. And it documents 10 separate instances in which President Donald Trump may have committed obstruction of justice, right? The whole first half of the report is about things that happened before the election, right? It's about efforts to interfere with the election. The whole second half of the report is about things that have happened since Donald Trump became president, right? As president, did Donald Trump attempt to use the powers of his office to obstruct a full and fair investigation into what happened during the election? And the report details 10 separate instances in which he may have done so. Here's what the headings for this part of the table of contents look like. I couldn't get all 10 to fit on one slide, so I just selected some good ones. But the president's efforts to remove the special counsel, the president's efforts to curtail the investigation, the president orders McGahn, that's White House counsel Don McGahn, to deny that the president tried to fire the special counsel, right? These are the things those are headers in the table of contents, right? These are the things that are documented at length in the report, and there's 10 of them. And for each of them, the report goes through the evidence point by point, right? So they have lots of testimonial evidence. Trump himself refused to appear and answer questions in person from the special counsel. He did answer some questions in writing, but refused to answer any questions about obstruction of justice, even in writing. But Don McGahn testified at length. Don McGahn's chief of staff testified at length. Lots of people testified. Plus, there's all the documentary evidence, right? They have the email chains and the phone records and the like. And so they go through all 10 of these episodes, and they lay out the evidence of obstruction of justice. And what they're looking for in each one of those episodes is the 3 different evidence of the 3 different component parts of a criminal obstruction of justice case. If you're going to charge somebody with obstruction of justice, you got to prove these 3 things. You got to prove that somebody engaged in an obstructive act, they did something attempting to obstruct, that it had some connection to an ongoing investigation. There has to actually be an investigation if you're going to be able to commit obstruction of justice, and that they have to have undertaken that act with a corrupt intent. So not like I mistakenly threw away some documents that I didn't think anybody was ever going to look at again, but no, I put those documents in the shredder in order to keep the prosecutors from finding them, right? So if you prove those three things, you have proved that somebody has engaged in criminal obstruction of justice. And a number of, I'm going to borrow here from some lawyers who've gone through the report with a fine-tooth comb and attempted to document for each of those 10 episodes, did Mueller provide evidence of each of these three things, right? And so here's a chart, this is from a lawyer named Richard Hogue, where you can see so these first three columns are those three elements of the offense that I just described to you, and the green boxes say yes, meaning on this particular lawyer's judgment, Richard Hogue's judgment, the report provides sufficient evidence that that element of the offense could be proved, right? And so to just take an example, the proposed firing of the special counsel, for example, right? All the boxes say yes, right? So they don't all say yes. They didn't have sufficient evidence necessarily for all of the episodes, but on, I think it's like 5 of them, 5 of the episodes, the report presents sufficient evidence of all three elements of a federal obstruction of justice offense. I'll say yeah, so I've got some notes on the firing of Mueller, just as an example, right? So Trump repeatedly ordered the White House counsel to have the special counsel fired, right? McGahn refused to do so, but Trump repeatedly ordered him to do it. Trump, at the time of issuing those orders, knew that he himself was under investigation. He and his campaign were under investigation, right? So there's the nexus to the ongoing investigation. And 3, and this part was new in the report, we didn't know this previously, prior to issuing those orders, the White House counsel, Don McGahn, had told Donald Trump, do not order me to fire the special counsel. That would be improper. Do not do that. That would be improper. Do not do it. And Trump did it anyway, subsequently, right? So he knew, he had been directly informed by his attorney, by the White House attorney, right, that to do so would be improper. It would be an effort to obstruct an investigation of your own allegedly criminal behavior. Don't do it. And the fact that he did it anyway goes to the corrupt motive, right? That he was willing, even having been warned, he was willing to issue such an order. So that's just one of the 10 examples, right? But volume 2 of the report goes through in painstaking detail each of those 10 cases and lays out the evidence. Nonetheless, the report does not recommend that President Donald Trump be indicted for obstruction of justice. Remember, this was Attorney General Barr's second bullet point here. So that's worth thinking a little bit about as well. Why, after all this evidence I just talked about, why firing the guy who's investigating you, and when you know that you're not supposed to do that, seems like obstruction of justice. So why does the report not recommend that Trump be indicted for obstruction of justice? I'm going to apologize, I got some more red text on this slide coming up. But the report gives us an answer. So volume 2 of the report, at the very beginning, the opening of volume 2 of the report, reviews the existing Justice Department policies. I'm just telling you what it says there, so if you can't see it, it's okay. The opening of volume 2 of the report reviews existing Justice Department policies governing the indictment of a sitting president. And those policies say you are not allowed to indict a sitting president. That policy might be wrong. It's controversial among people like I hang out with, right? Constitutional scholars have lots of debates about whether that's the right policy or not. It was adopted by Nixon's Justice Department. There are some good legal reasons for it, right? There's reasons to have some constitutional concern if you had like rogue federal prosecutors, right, trying to like indict the sitting president. That could cause some potential problems. So there is some areas for concern there. But the policy is controversial, right? It could go either way on that. But Robert Mueller worked for the Department of Justice, right? He's like, it's not up to me whether that is the right policy or not. Special counsel's office is part of the Department of Justice. We are bound, it says this at the beginning of volume 2, we are bound by the Department of Justice's existing policy prohibiting the indictment of a sitting president. We are not allowed to indict President Donald Trump. It says it point blank, right? The next thing it says is kind of interesting. And this one is a little bit counterintuitive sometimes for people, but it's important. And it says this explicitly, again, at the beginning of volume 2. It says, because we are not allowed to indict him, right, that's what the previous paragraph said, we're not allowed to indict him, and the next point, because we are not allowed to indict him, it would not be fair to Donald Trump for us to publicly accuse him of having committed a crime. Think about that for a second, because it makes sense. Ordinarily, federal prosecutors do not go on TV and say, so-and-so has committed a crime, but I'm not going to indict her. James Comey did do it a week before the election, but ordinarily, federal prosecutors do not do that. And the reason they don't do it is because if I'm a federal prosecutor and I charge you with a federal crime, you have an opportunity to clear your name. That opportunity is called a trial, right? I charge you with a crime, but you didn't do it. Take it to trial and show that you didn't do it, and you have cleared your name. If I go on TV and say, oh, you committed a crime, but don't worry, I'm not going to indict you. Wait, you got nothing. You got no recourse. You have no trial, so there's no opportunity to clear your name. So we are not allowed to indict the sitting president. And so in fairness to that sitting president, we concluded at the outset of our inquiry that it would be inappropriate for us to publicly accuse Donald Trump of having violated federal criminal laws. Because we'd be saying, you'd violate the law, but we're not indicting you, so you have no opportunity to clear your name. That wouldn't be fair, so we're not going to do it, no matter what the evidence shows. He did say, if the evidence showed us that Donald Trump had not committed a crime, we would say that out loud. That's not unfair to anybody. And we are not saying it. Right? If we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. This is from Robert Mueller's press conference at the end of May, but the report says something very similar. If there was evidence that exonerated him, we would say so, and we have not reached that conclusion, is what the report says. Right? So that's why there's no recommendation of an indictment for obstruction of justice. We're not allowed to indict him, and because we're not allowed to indict him, it is also not fair to him, the potential criminal defendant, to publicly accuse him of having committed a crime. And so we decided at the outset that no matter what the evidence shows, we will not publicly accuse Donald Trump of having committed a crime. So if you hear somebody on TV say that Special Counsel Mueller decided not to indict President Donald Trump for obstruction of justice because there is no evidence that he engaged in obstruction of justice, that is a falsehood. It is not true if Attorney General Barr says it. It is not true if Donald Trump says it himself, which he frequently says on Twitter. It is not true if a member of Congress says it. This is Representative John Cadko. Who shortly after Easter weekend sat down with the Post-Standard editorial board. He said he had spent the holiday weekend reading the report. He said, I know Robert Mueller, which is true. They work together in the Department of Justice. They know each other. He said, I know Robert Mueller, and I am confident that if he had found the evidence that Trump engaged in obstruction of justice, he would have indicted him. That is just false. That is the opposite of what it says in the report, right? Here's a quote from Special Counsel Mueller himself. This is again from his May 29th press conference. We did not make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime. The introduction to Volume 2 of the report explains why. Because we are not allowed to indict him, right? That is why we did not indict him, because we are not allowed to indict him, right? And so anybody who says on TV, or not on TV, anywhere, says they did not find evidence of obstruction of justice, case closed, he's been exonerated, that is just, that person has either not read Volume 2 of the report, which there's been substantial public reporting that most Republican members of Congress have still not read the report. So that's possible. But John Katko said explicitly, I spent the weekend reading it. And so he's a federal prosecutor. I'm pretty sure he knows how to read. He's a former federal prosecutor. I'm pretty sure he knows how to read these documents, right? So I don't likely like to call people a liar, but it does not seem true to me. It does not seem like an accurate statement that any informed person could draw from reading Volume 2 of Special Counsel Mueller's report. The last thing I want to say here is, so if the special counsel and his team determined at the outset that we are not going to criminally indict the sitting president, then what was the point of all of this? Why did we spend so many years and months and dollars and whatever going through all this investigation? The report tells us the answer to that too, and it says three things. It says three things. First of all, anybody who is not the sitting president can be indicted, right? And in fact, we have indicted a bunch of them, right? We indicted Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager. We indicted Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former lawyer. We indicted the National Security Advisors, Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos, former National Security Advisors to the campaign, right? Lots of folks other than the sitting president have been indicted, and that was part of our charge to investigate that. So that's one purpose. A second purpose is that the Justice Department policy about indicting the president only applies to the sitting president. It does not apply to former presidents. And so it seemed to us valuable to preserve, it says this in the report, seemed to us valuable to preserve a contemporaneous record of all of the available evidence in case it should be necessary for any future prosecution of a former president of the United States. Right? Once Donald Trump is no longer president, that Justice Department policy does not apply to him anymore, and he can be indicted, and so we're trying to preserve the evidence. And third, the main constitutional mechanism for checking abuses of power by the President of the United States is called impeachment. That mechanism is in the hands of Congress, and so it seemed to us, the Special Counsel Mueller talking, it seemed to us valuable to summarize all of the available evidence and make it available for Congress's review so that they can decide what to do with it and whether it merits the initiation of a formal impeachment inquiry, which is the point where we are now. That is the special counsel's work is done, right? And he has put that on Congress's plate, right? Here's the evidence. We can indict him. You can impeach him. That's your job to decide whether to do that or not. That is on your table now. And that is precisely the moment where we are right now, is with Congress trying to decide what to do about that. So let me stop there and take questions.
Was the public aware all along during this investigation that this president could not be indicted?
I don't think the public was aware of that. I think most of the American public is still not aware of it, frankly. Scholars have been aware of it, and some lawyers have been debating about this existing policy and what Special Counsel Mueller would do about it. There has been periodic public reporting about it, like the newspapers, trying to talk. I mean, they can never get anybody from the special counsel's team to actually talk to them during the investigation. It was a really tight ship. But they would talk to lawyers for Donald Trump, for example, and they would say, like, oh no, he didn't break the law, but also they're not allowed to indict the president. So there was occasional public reporting that referred to it, but I don't think it's widely known. I don't think it's widely known, right? Most of the public has not read the report, and Attorney General Barr's summary did not mention that policy. And in fact, when in his testimony to Congress and in some questions with reporters, when he was explicitly asked about that policy, again, this is back in March before the report was available, he said, oh yes, that policy was not the reason that indictments were not recommended, right? I mean, this is not really accurate, right? And so there's been some just lack of information for the public, and maybe some also intentional efforts to mislead the public on this front. Yeah, way in the back.
Thank you very much, by the way. It's a good summary, I think, of where things stand today. So looking forward, we seem to have a situation where Nancy Pelosi, the leadership of the Democratic controlled House, is reluctant to pursue impeachment. So if we're waiting for the next presidential election and what happens subsequent to that, what can you tell us about whether or not Mueller and his attorneys have filed sealed indictments that may refer specifically to Donald Trump?
So I
That would
can,
be open subsequent to his leaving office.
so I can tell you for sure that that part has not happened, at least to the best of my knowledge, because the report itself says, when discussing the Justice Department policy, that this applies to sealed indictments as well. We are not even allowed to do a secret indictment of the sitting president that doesn't get publicly revealed until after he's no longer in office. That, again, that might be a bad policy, but that is Mueller's interpretation of the current Justice Department policy. So to the best of our knowledge, there are no sealed indictments of Donald Trump. There are some other criminal indictments of other associated people that we don't know about yet. One of the main reasons for redacting certain portions of the report is material that is relevant to an ongoing criminal matter, right? So there's, for example, grand jury investigations still going on and potential prosecutions to result that are referred to in parts of the report that are blacked out because they don't want to, influence the jury and that kind of thing when that's still ongoing. But there's no indictments of Donald Trump. And so to come back to the first part of your question, so that really does leave us with impeachment, right? This may or may not be the right policy, but the status quo is that federal prosecutors will not and basically cannot indict the president for committing a crime. And so that leaves us, the mechanism is impeachment. And if you go back, so there's two ways to think about this. There's thinking about it in terms of like constitutional principle, and there's thinking about it in terms of political strategy, right? And if you go back to the framers' account of the impeachment process, I mean, there's stuff from the founding generation that is remarkably prescient. They didn't get everything right. They designed some things that didn't work out that well. But on impeachment, their discussion of it, they refer repeatedly to political leaders who sound an awful lot like Donald Trump, right? Leaders who are influenced by foreign governments, leaders who are after their own private financial gains rather than the public interest, leaders who manage to trick the public into being elected in some way, and then it comes to light after their election that they somehow did something unfair, right? All of those are situations in which the impeachment mechanism is available, right? That's what it's there for, to remove a president who is abusing his powers from office, at which point he can then be criminally indicted if he committed a crime, right? Those are two separate things, but once you've done this one, you can do this one too. So that's the constitutional principle. I mean, that's a short version of the constitutional principle discussion. But there's also the political strategy discussion, and congressional Democrats are currently sharply divided about whether it is politically wise to launch an impeachment investigation of Donald Trump. Speaker Pelosi's position consistently for some months now has been that this will only help Donald Trump, right? It will rile up. We can't successfully remove him because Republicans in the Senate are never going to go for it. And so what does it accomplish? And it just riles up his base. That's Speaker Pelosi's position. That's something we could talk more about. There's a lot of folks who disagree with that take on it. Yeah, right now.
You've been talking about the DOJ policy and federal indictments. What about the Southern District of New York and other crimes?
So Southern District of New York is still part of DOJ, right? So that's an office of the Federal Justice Department. So one of the things that Special Counsel Mueller's team did is in the course of their investigation, they uncovered lots of evidence of criminal activity on multiple different fronts, right? And they kept within their own office the stuff that was most directly relevant to the charge that they had been given. And when they uncovered other evidence of things like, hush money payments to Donald Trump's affair, women Donald Trump has had affairs with, that kind of thing, they referred those out to other federal prosecutors' offices, in part, I think, in an effort to make it harder to shut down the investigation. Even if they fire me and shut down our whole office, there are other ongoing criminal investigations that would still be able to proceed. They'd have to go to more effort to shut those down too. But all of those do still report to Attorney General Barr. So there is some legitimate reason for concern about whether Attorney General Barr is going to allow the full and fair conduct of those investigations, right? But then there also are state criminal investigations ongoing,
Yeah,
right? So New York Attorney General Tish James has also launched a variety of investigations, right? Trump's businesses are all based in New York, right? And by all appearances, the guy has engaged in a rampant pattern of illegality for years, right? Not just since he's been president, right? But for years and years and years, there's evidence. And so if he's engaged in tax fraud, right, or whatever, he should be investigated for that, including state tax fraud, right? If he's defrauding New York from lawfully owed taxes, he should be investigated for that. And there have been some maneuvers in Albany to try to shore up those efforts and make it clear that not only can we investigate him and try to get some restitution for things that he owes the state, but that we can potentially file criminal charges against him, right, if the investigation leads to that. Those are still pretty early on.
Okay, but if he's still president, do they have to wait or can
Right,
they
yeah, so yeah, if a state government, so the Department of Justice policy does not apply to New York Attorney General Tish James, but if she tried to indict the sitting president, Donald Trump's lawyers would quickly go to federal court and say, just like the federal justice department's not allowed to indict me, state prosecutors would be more not allowed, and he would probably win that argument, right? Before today's Supreme Court, he's going to win a lot of things, but even with a slightly fairer Supreme Court, I think he would have a good chance of winning that argument, because it does cause potential constitutional problems to have state prosecutors prosecuting a sitting
So
president.
they can investigate, but they probably
Probably can't indict
Yeah.
until he's no longer
charge
president.
him until, yeah.
Yes.
Couple of things. I seem to remember in the beginning of the report where he says, we didn't look at collusion because it's not a thing.
Yeah.
We couldn't establish a criminal conspiracy, but then there were certain caveats, like we didn't have available all the witnesses that we would have liked to interview.
Yeah.
We didn't have access to all of the documents because some of them were destroyed or
Trump himself
incorrectly.
refused to be interviewed, right? Yeah.
Trump
Right.
himself refused. So basically what he says is, I wasn't able to do as thorough an investigation as I would have. Obviously, he didn't have the Russians to interview, all the Russians that he got it right. That's one point that I wanted to ask you about, but also, when they say no coordination, didn't Rick Gates provide internal polling data?
I think Manafort did, yeah.
Well,
maybe both of them.
Manafort
yeah.
told Rick
Yeah,
Gates,
okay, yeah.
even after he was
Yeah.
indicted,
Yeah.
he was providing this polling data on an ongoing basis.
Right, so Trump campaign officials provided internal polling data, right? So the campaigns do their own polls, not like the New York Times poll, but their own private polls to help guide their strategy. Well, which states should we be putting resources into? And they don't publicly release that information. But Trump campaign officials provided that information to Russian agents, presumably to help them target their social media efforts in the same states that the campaign thought were a good prospect. That sounds like coordination, right? So all I can tell you is, right, so I didn't go through this part in as much detail, but remember when we were on obstruction of justice and I showed you got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt each of these three components of the crime, and so there are similar requirements for proving conspiracy and coordination to illegally influence the election, and you have to, you've got to be able to prove each of those things beyond a reasonable doubt. And Mueller's conclusion, rightly or wrongly, was that they did not have sufficient evidence to do that. And as you said, he does say in the report, there may be some things that we did not successfully get to the bottom of because some witnesses refused to be interviewed, right? Some documents may have been destroyed, right? So we don't know. We don't know. But that is for sure a possibility that there's even further evidence of coordination that Trump campaign officials have successfulally kept under wraps, right? So like several witnesses flipped, but some have, right? Manafort not cooperated. Right? He had made a cooperation agreement, but then they canceled it because he kept lying to them. Yes, there is potentially other stuff that we still don't know about for sure. In the back.
What about executive privilege that the current president is
constantly now, just everything is like, well, you can't have that because it's executive privilege. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So executive privilege is one of these concepts that is not written in the Constitution. Those words do not appear in the constitutional text, but it seems pretty clear, it's widely accepted, that the concept has to exist in some way. There has to be some realm of secrecy that the president can invoke for private conversations with himself and his closest advisors in order to be able to get full and frank advice before making a decision about whether to go to war or something, right? Everybody has to be able to share their thoughts with him without fear of subsequent litigation. But the scope of it has long been in dispute, right? So this was a famous focus of the Watergate case. So President Nixon's lawyer argued that there is something called executive privilege. It is invocable entirely at the president's discretion, and its scope is entirely up to the president, and that is not reviewable by any court, right? We get to say what falls within executive privilege, and nobody is allowed to second guess it. His lawyer, Jeffrey Sinclair, James Sinclair, somebody Sinclair, Nixon's lawyer argued in the Supreme Court. There's a famous, in the Watergate case, famous episode. He came in the court, and he's like, oh yeah, entirely up to the president. And Thurgood Marshall, who's a justice on the court at the time, starts asking him questions, and he's like, because sorry, I'm just digressing, but I think it's a good story. So the case was at the Supreme Court because Federal District Judge John Syracuse had issued a subpoena for, once we found out there was a White House recording system, Judge Syracuse subpoenaed the tapes. If there are any recordings of Oval Office conversations with the following people on the following dates about the following matters, you got to turn them over because they're relevant to this ongoing criminal investigation. Trump refused to obey the subpoena, refused to turn over the tapes, and I mean Nixon.
They're somewhat interchangeable.
And they go to the Supreme Court, and Nixon's lawyers are like, oh yeah, executive privilege is entirely up to the president. And Thurgood Marshall's like, okay, wait a minute. So you ignored the subpoena, right? And the lawyer's like, oh no, well, we filed a motion to quash the subpoena, which is the lawyer's term, but we asked the judge to get rid of the subpoena. And Justice Marshall says, and the difference between ignoring the subpoena and filing a motion to quash it is what? And Nixon's lawyer goes, and it's like 20 seconds. And Thurgood Marshall goes, the difference is that you are submitting it to the court to decide whether this is within the proper scope of the subpoena or not, right? And he's like, 10 more seconds, and he has no answer to that because it does not make any sense to say that it is entirely up to the president to decide on the scope of executive privilege for keeping secret materials that are relevant to an ongoing criminal prosecution. Obviously, courts have something to say about that, right? So executive privilege clearly exists, but there is clear precedent for presidents trying to abuse it by saying they can put anything they want within the category of executive privilege, and courts don't get to second guess it. So if we had full faith and confidence in our courts, then we would say Trump's aggressive uses of the executive privilege power in recent weeks are way overboard and are not going to stand up. I think that statement is still true, but I am not as confident in it as I would like to be, given the current makeup of our court. Like, Trump clearly thinks he's got the Supreme Court in his pocket, and whatever else happens, they're going to step in and save him. I hope that is not the case, and I wish I were more confident that it is not the case. Yeah.
Before I ask my question, this famous line from United States v. Nixon. His lawyer's first line was, the president wants me to argue that he has all the power of King James III, but only for 4 years at a time. So, I don't have that case in front of me, but I have a similar case regarding the Independent Counsel Act.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting.
Morrison versus Olson?
Yep, Morrison v. Olson. And I'm wondering, the courts don't deal with political questions, and it's kind of a mess when you get with this. And federal judges that look at this and are like, I don't want to touch this until it's more clean. But my question is, what about civil action? I mean, presidents are immune, but only in their official actions. So in his campaign, if he was doing something, could you file a civil lawsuit or, some sort or something like that?
So there's a case from the Clinton era, there's a Supreme Court decision from the Clinton era in which, so Paula Jones had accused President Clinton of engaging in sexual harassment when he was governor of Arkansas. And so it was an action that did not take place while he was president, it was before he was president, but the suit was actually filed while he was president. And his lawyers argued the president is not subject to civil suit while he is in office, right? It violates the separation of powers. You got rogue lawyers and judges imposing too many limits on the president. I got important stuff to do. I can't be called in to testify in court. What they said is, pretty sweeping argument, I am completely immune from civil suits while I am in office. And the Supreme Court ruled against him in that case. The Supreme Court said, nope. I understand that there's limits, he's got an important job to do, we fully expect any judge overseeing any of these cases to negotiate generously with the president's staff in terms of use of his time. He can obviously testify by video deposition rather than showing up in Arkansas if he needs to, that kind of thing. But we see no reason to hold that the president is completely immune from civil suits while he is in office, because if we did hold that, it would sound like the president is above the law, right? The president can do things that are basically illegal and nobody's allowed to sue him. We're not going to say that, right? That decision was 7-1, I believe. It was a clear and sweeping ruling against presidential immunity from civil suit. It is possible that the court that decided that case would say something similar about criminal indictments, right? If you had asked them at that time, can the president be criminally indicted while he's in office, they might have said yes. But the court we have today is different, and so I don't think the current court would say that. Yeah.
Is there any occurrences where a statute of limitation can be paused? Like I commit a crime, I leave the country, go somewhere where there's no extradition, 4 years, tick-tock, I can come back? Or is there something that can pause this?
Yeah, so
the district judge said, we're gonna let you file, but we're gonna pause until he's out of office. Supreme Court and the court was reversed.
Yeah, so the Clinton's lawyers argued several things. Lawyers always do this, right? First, we're completely immune. Right, that one doesn't work. Then, well, we're not completely immune, but you just have to pause the trial. The suit can be filed, and you can begin the process of collecting evidence, but you can't force me to do anything until I'm no longer president. But they acknowledged in that situation you could pause the statute of limitations. But they didn't even win on that. The court's no, the suit can just go ahead, and you can be forced to do a deposition, right? They got to negotiate with you about the timing. So yes, there are circumstances in which courts can pause. It's harder for criminal cases than for civil cases because, in fairness to one of the purposes of statutes of limitations is fairness to criminal defendants. Right? If the evidence gets more stale, it's less fair to put them on trial 20 years later. So I don't know if any of the crimes. I don't know if a judge on her own could pause the statute of limitations for any of the crimes that Donald Trump is accused of committing. That I think would be subject to some significant dispute. Right, but that's civil, not criminal.
Yeah, she did it on her own, which I found interesting.
Yeah, right.
It seems like we have a precedent that doesn't obey the rules that have been set up and doesn't go along with the precedents that have been set up for all this time. In fact, he would really like to make his own. Okay? And how with this report in mind and in the future, how do you think the scenario is going to lay out as far as the government handling this situation?
So that's a big question, right? So I have this one I was going to put it. This is the big picture, right? Donald Trump took the same oath that every other president has taken, right? Those words are in the constitutional text. Every president has to swear to do those things. by my reckoning, he's not living up to that oath, right? I mean,
It says to the best of my ability.
So the fundamental purpose of the impeachment power, right? There's a lot of debate, right? The impeachment power says it's to be used in cases of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, and there's a lot of debate about what exactly that phrase means, like what counts as an impeachable offense. But the fundamental purpose is that the power was there as a mechanism to check a president who is abusing the powers of his office, like in an ongoing way. It's not just that he did a bad thing a year ago, but that he is a threat to our constitutional order because of his ongoing abuse of the powers of his office. And one way to think of that is his ongoing violations of the oath of office. And but the problem is, like one of the problems is, the impeachment power in our Congress is more or less dysfunctional at the moment because of the extreme levels of partisan polarization and what I would characterize as the Republican Party, slightly inflammatory, but I think it's true, right? The Republican Party has abandoned its commitment to American constitutional democracy, right? The leadership of the Republican Party from the top down is more committed to their conservative ideological goals than they are to democracy. So if we can't win elections fairly, then we're going to win them unfairly, right? We're going to disenfranchise voters. We're going to redraw the districts in unfair ways. Like, that's what we're going to do if that's what we have to do to win. And so in that situation, it is really like the mechanisms that are set up by our Constitution don't really work. They're not completely broken, right? We still have a more or less free and fair election in fall of 2018. Not completely free and fair. There was some gerrymandering and some voter disenfranchisement and the like, but a more or less free and fair election in 2018. And Democrats recaptured the House, which creates an institutional base from which the president can be checked in some ways, right? So that's part of the constitutional system working. But the Senate is still in Republican hands. It's badly, like, you think the House districts are badly gerrymandered. The Senate gerrymandering is like built into the Constitution, right? California's got 40 million people with 2 senators. Wyoming's got 500,000 people with 2 senators. There's no way you can justify that, but it's baked into the Constitution, can't easily be changed. And so impeachment the impeachment power is kind of broken at the moment. And that is true for lots of aspects of our constitutional system at the moment. And so the question, this is like a question for everybody in the room, right? The question is the system, if the American people are mad enough and engaged enough and work hard enough and push hard enough and talk to their friends and family members enough, right? Can we overcome all of the unfair institutional features that have like developed in our system, right? So I am not 100% confident that we're going to have fully free and fair elections next year, but we're going to have elections and we have to win them. We got to win by a margin that is bigger than the margin by which the other side is trying to cheat, right? And if we do that, then we can recapture the institutions. And one of the things, I got lots of complaints about congressional Democrats, but one of the things I will give them credit for is they have been attempting to push for not just important policies like Medicare for all, healthcare and the like, but institutional changes to help fix some of these problems. Universal voter registration, a ban on partisan gerrymandering, getting rid of the Electoral College and going to a direct popular vote. All of those things would help lessen some of the ways in which our institutions are currently busted. And of course, we gotta win the election somehow in order to make any of those things happen. So we really are stuck. So I got time for like 2 more questions. Okay, yeah.
I just want to ask you. That's a perfect segue into what I'm thinking. Why can't Why are we going after the Senate for obstruction of justice and for all of this stuff? I mean,
Oh.
collusion or not collusion, but conspiracy. I mean, that's really the hub of what's keeping everything that he's doing together.
Right.
And I mean, I understand the investigation into him, but I don't understand why we're not chewing the Senate down
Or at least literally Mitch McConnell.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean,
I mean,
we-
so Mitch McConnell is up for re-election next year, and there are plenty of folks in Kentucky who are trying to unseat him, and they would love to have your help, you know. And, you know,
maybe investigate.
there's two kinds of answers, right? So one kind of answer is that in functional democracies, we're not constantly like prosecuting our political opponents, right? And so it's like not like we don't like going down that road is really dangerous. The other kind of answer is just Donald Trump is currently in charge of the Department of Justice. So at the moment, there is no feasible mechanism for investigating Mitch McConnell for doing it, right? Like it's like we don't have any influence directly over the Department of Justice. And so what we have to try to do is, it'd be great to unseat Mitch McConnell, or if you unseat enough Republican senators, even if he's still there, he's the minority leader instead of the majority leader, so that's better. And then still, you're going to have to start playing with Senate rules, because as minority leader, he was causing an awful lot of haywire under President Obama as well. So the main, there's lots of fronts to be like pushing on. Obviously, our elections next year, or what if, I mean, there's elections going on this year too. I don't want people to forget about the local elections. Those are important. Some of us got elections to vote in next week. But next year's elections are huge, right? And all of the organizing that we can do here in the North Side suburbs and everywhere else to try to find and recruit candidates, to try to identify and register new voters, to try to reach out and have face-to-face conversations with those voters, which is proven to help influence voter turnout. All of the things that we can do on those fronts between now and November 2020 to make it so that it is such a massive wave of popular rejection of the Trump administration's agenda that no matter how badly the districts are gerrymandered, no matter how many fake Russian Facebook accounts there are telling you crazy stuff, right, the wave is going to wash over top of those things. That is not fair. That's infuriating, right? Why do we got to make the wave that big? Why can't we just be 50% 1 plus 1? It's not fair, but that's what we have to do next year. And if we do that, then there is some prospect that we can make some of the institutional changes. So, you know, some of these institutional changes are already happening at the state level, right, which is amazing in Albany, but we need them at the federal level too, and so we got to win those elections. And then all the, like, fixing the U.S. Senate is going to be a long and a hard process, but we can't even really attempt it unless we get Mitch McConnell out of the majority leader's position. So I would love to keep chatting about this for as many times as long as we can. I want to answer as many questions, but Christine is signaling me.
You can do one more.
Christine says I can do one more, but there's 4 people in there.
Two more.
All right, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to real quick hear from a couple questions, and then I'm going to give you the answer that answers all of them at once. I can do that.
So Donald Trump tweeted over this weekend something about, well, you know, after 6 years and the fake media, after I'm reelected, and then 6 years later, the American people aren't going to let me go. They're going to insist I stay. So that scares the shit out of me. But my question is, what do you think is a bridge too far for these Republicans? This is what's worrying me. Like, what is it? Is it going to be like he doesn't give up the office and he doesn't walk away in 4 years when he gets beaten? What's the bridge too far?
Yeah, so I like that question. I'm gonna take 2 or 3 questions. Yeah.
I recently read that I think 13 states have passed laws that would allocate their electors based on popular vote within that state. And I wondered, how is that constitutional? Isn't it spelled out in the Constitution for all the electors?
Also a great question.
I know the emoluments clause is not part of this discussion. However, just briefly touch on the level of importance. You know, if you go after Trump with the emoluments, on the hierarchy of sins, where does that stand?
Yeah. Steve.
One thing which we haven't talked about, these are all great questions by the way, is I'm really concerned about, we know the Russians hacked into various electoral systems. Who's to say they don't come in and remove just enough voter registrations? People, I think it's probably accepted, some people are not going to show back up if they're rejected. They may not put in the absentee ballot. And a lot of these elections are not lost by 10%, they're lost by 1% or 0.5%. And you don't have to do it three or, just a few states is enough.
Yeah.
So and there's a commitment by the Congress to do nothing about election security.
So this is one of the most infuriating things about Mitch McConnell, right? Who is just like utterly uninterested in securing our elections at all. This is Robert Mueller's main conclusion, right? There were multiple systematic efforts to interfere in our election. That allegation deserves the attention of every American. One reason it deserves the attention of every American is because it's ongoing. Russians were interfering in European elections 2 weeks ago, right? I mean, it's like an ongoing, systematic, state-sponsored effort to disrupt and destabilize existing Western democracies, right? And our current government is barely trying to protect our elections at all, and I have a lot of concern about that. The Electoral College is a great question. The Constitution really does not spell it out that much. The Constitution spells out how many electors each state gets, but it says that it's up to each state how to award those electors. At the beginning, none of the states even had popular elections for president. They just had state legislative elections, and then their state legislatures would appoint people to the Electoral College. And so it can be changed, and so there is an ongoing effort. It's not to say that people aren't going to challenge this in court. They would challenge it in court, but there's some support for it. There's an ongoing effort to like a workaround. Without a constitutional amendment, you could get enough states with 270 electoral votes to agree that we're all on the same page, we're all going to join this pact together. Whoever wins the national popular vote, we're going to give our state's electoral votes to them. And that doesn't matter what the other states do, because we got 270. The pact doesn't take effect until we get enough states with 270 electoral votes. That's when it would take effect. So that's a complicated workaround. It's hard to explain to the American people. New York's legislature has enacted it, as have a number of other blue states. And so that's an ongoing effort. Malcolm I know, and so I'm going to chat with him about the Emoluments Clause later. The Emoluments Clause says it's basically a prohibition in the Constitution against foreign corruption of our political leaders, right? It says that presidents and other office holders are not supposed to accept gifts of any kind from foreign governments. And so if foreign governments are booking lengthy stays at your hotel while you are president, that you are directly profiting from, yeah. Right, or your golf courses, right. So that seems like a clear, right, lawsuits were filed against Trump on day one. Zephyr Teachout and Lawrence Tribe and a bunch of other bigwig lawyers filed a lawsuit against him on day one, and that lawsuit is still ongoing. It's still pending in federal court, slowly, right. Donna's question, I wish I had a good answer to. What is going to be a bridge too far for Republicans? I mean, I have been proven wrong too many times. I'm not going to say something again, right? Like, I mean, I didn't think Trump was going to win the election, right? And every time he did something crazy for the first year or whatever, I was like, okay, here's where John Katko and Jeff Flake and Lindsey Graham, right? And reasonable-minded Republicans. That's how I used to think of these people, right? This is going to be a bridge too far for them. And it never is. It never is. There's occasional rhetorical hand-wringing, right? Senator Flake was especially good at this, right? With anguished, like, tweets, you know, like, oh, I'm really not comfortable with this. Like, what kind of thing? Too bad you're not a member of a co-equal branch of government that has the authority to do something about it, right? I mean, like, there seems to be nothing. There seems to be nothing. Like, I mean, Trump's famous line, right, is that you could shoot somebody and he would not lose any support. And that seems like a crazy thing to say. And I don't think it's actually true, but I don't know. There's no actual thing. There's so many examples of things that have happened where you think that's got to be the one.
I mean, he'd hire an assassin to do it.
Right, yeah. So there's so many examples of things where it seems like that's got to be the one. I'm really bad at cutting this off, but I think what Christine wants me to do. Look, here's what we're gonna do. So the library closes at 8, right? So they will actually kick us out in 30 minutes. anybody who lives in the north side suburbs or is otherwise interested in helping to form an indivisible group up here, stay in your seats or maybe even come towards the front of the room, right? And Christine and others are going to chat with you a little bit. And if anybody wants to pop out into the library there, if we're not disturbing people too much, and ask me any more questions. Oh yeah, ask me any more questions about the Mueller report. I will answer them. And Deborah, Christine can talk about this. Right? But if you're leaving, Deborah's going to hand you a card on the way out. Deborah?
These are postcards that are addressed to John Packo, asking